The evening that Cornelius Aurelius died, it was raining in a way that felt personal. Not the gentle, apologetic kind of rain that merely dampens shoulders and ruins newspapers. This was the kind of rain that had an opinion, thick, relentless sheets of water that hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurelius Tower like it had a grudge against glass. The kind of rain that made people inside feel trapped and people outside feel punished. In the 62nd floor corner office, surrounded by the architecture of his own ambition, Cornelius Aurelius I, founder of Aurelius Global, a conglomerate worth $31 billion spanning real estate, pharmaceuticals, private aviation, and media, pressed one manicured hand to his chest, looked out at the drowning city beneath him, and said nothing. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell to be notified anytime I upload new stories. Let's dive into the story. Cornelius Aurelius had always believed that truly powerful men chose the manner of their exits. He had planned boardroom takeovers with military precision. He had dismantled rivals with the surgical patience of a chess grandmaster who never played for fun. He had built an empire from a single hardware store in Galveston, Texas, that his own father had nearly bankrupted through gambling and bourbon. Cornelius Aurelius had controlled everything. He did not control this. His assistant, Prita, 27 years loyal, the last honest person in a building full of performers, found him slumped in his leather chair at 7:42 p.m., his whiskey glass still balanced perfectly in his other hand, unspilled, as though some part of him had refused to make even dying into a mess. She screamed once, quietly, then called the ambulance. Then, with a professionalism that would later break her own heart, she called the family. She called them in a specific order. She called Dominique first. Dominique Aurelius was 34 years old, the youngest of the 4 Aurelius children and the only daughter, and she was the only one who answered on the first ring. She had been in her home office, a converted Victorian townhouse in the Montrose neighborhood of Houston, surrounded by 3 monitors, a whiteboard covered in acquisition projections, and a cold cup of coffee that had been hot 6 hours ago. She had her father's jaw, sharp enough to cast a shadow, and her mother's eyes, dark and reading everything. She wore her hair pulled back in a way that people always tried to read as severe, but was really just efficient. When Prita told her, Dominique said nothing for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Is he gone?" Prita said yes. Dominique said, "Don't let anyone into that office until I get there." She was in her car, 12 seconds after hanging up. Prita called Marcus second. Marcus Aurelius, 38, eldest son, VP of Real Estate at Aurelius Global, was at a charity gala at the Houston Museum of Natural History, which meant he was drinking overpriced scotch in a tuxedo and telling a story to a circle of people who were laughing at things that weren't funny because he was rich and they wanted something from him. He was handsome in the way that men who have never had to work very hard for attention become handsome, effortlessly, carelessly, and with a faint cruelty around the eyes. When his phone buzzed with Prita's number, he excused himself, stepped behind a marble pillar, and listened. His face did something complicated. Then it settled back into its usual arrangement. He told the people he'd been speaking to that he had to go. One of them was a woman in a gold dress named Cassidy, who was not his wife, and whose hand he had been holding under the table before the call came. He gave her a look that she would later describe to her therapist as the most honest thing he ever showed me, a look that was half grief and half calculation. And then he was gone. Prita called Julian third. Julian Aurelius was 36, the middle brother, and the one everyone liked most at family dinners because he told the best stories and never seemed angry about anything. He was also the one most likely to be lying to your face while doing it, which everyone sensed but nobody said out loud because he was too charming to confront. Julian was in Las Vegas. He was always, on some level, in Las Vegas, even when he was physically somewhere else. When he heard the news, he went very still. Then he said, okay. Then, does Mom know? Prita said she was calling him next. Julian said, I'll tell her. He hung up before Prita could object. He sat on the edge of a hotel bed in a suite that cost $4,000 a night and stared at the floor for a long time. Then he opened the minibar. Prita called Theodore last. Theo was 32, the youngest son, and the one that everyone in the family treated with a combination of affection and anxiety, the way you treat a beautiful dog that has bitten someone once. He was brilliant in flashes, genuinely, startlingly brilliant, but he burned with a kind of restless hunger that made people nervous. He worked in Aurelius Global's pharmaceutical division, which he had joined only 2 years ago after a period that the family referred to in clipped sentences as Theo's time away, which had involved a rehab facility in Arizona, a broken engagement, and a lawsuit that had been settled quietly. Theo was at home, sober, cooking pasta. He listened to Prita in silence. Then he asked one question that nobody else had asked. "Who's with Mom?" Eleanor Aurelius, née Whitfield, 61 years old, former Louisiana debutante, current queen of a crumbling court, was in the sunroom of the family estate in River Oaks when her youngest son arrived to tell her that her husband of 40 years was dead. She was sitting in a pale silk robe, drinking chamomile tea, watching a gardening program on a small television that Cornelius had always found embarrassing because of its size. She looked up when Theo came through the door, and she read his face the way only mothers read faces, completely and immediately all at once, like a page she had memorized. She set down her tea. She straightened her robe. She looked out the window at the rain-hammered garden. "Well," she said, "he always did love a dramatic exit." Then she began to cry, quietly, in the particular way of women who have spent decades being strong in rooms where weakness would have cost them something. Theo sat beside her and took her hand and didn't say anything, which was the only right thing to do. Cornelius was buried on a Tuesday, which he would have hated. He had believed Tuesdays were for accountants and apologies. The funeral was attended by 700 people, including 2 senators, a former vice president, and several people whose presence raised quiet eyebrows among those who knew what Aurelius Global had been involved in over the past decade in its pharmaceutical supply chain. The eulogies were long and dishonest in the way eulogies always are. Marcus spoke. He was very good. He cried at the right moment, which Dominique watched from the front pew with an expression she had taken care to make unreadable. Eleanor sat in black, still and composed, like a woman who had prepared for this and would not be undone by it in public. She wore a single strand of pearls that Cornelius had given her on their wedding night. She had not removed them in 40 years. She did not know yet what his will contained. She was the only one who didn't. The other 3, Marcus, Julian, Theo, had each, separately, found ways to receive information before the official reading. Marcus had a relationship with Cornelius's personal attorney, Harold Fitch, that dated back 20 years and involved favors traded like currency. Julian had simply charmed a paralegal at Fitch and Associates over several dinners, a paralegal who now deeply regretted it. And Theo had found the secondary copy of the will himself, 2 years ago, when he was supposedly at the estate helping with renovations, in a locked drawer of his father's home study that he had opened with a paperclip and adolescent stubbornness. They all knew. None of them told Dominique. None of them told Eleanor. The reading took place 8 days after the funeral in the 44th floor conference room of Fitch and Associates, a space designed entirely to communicate that the law was more permanent than any of the people in it. Harold Fitch was 70 years old and moved with the slowness of a man who understood that speed was a young person's mistake. He sat at the head of the table, adjusted his glasses, and opened a folder. Eleanor sat at one end. Her children sat in a row, Marcus, Julian, Theo, Dominique. Between the siblings sat approximately 40 years of unfinished sentences and borrowed loyalties. Harold Fitch cleared his throat. The estate of Cornelius Augustus Aurelius is valued at approximately $31.4 billion at the time of death, inclusive of personal assets, real property, and majority holdings in Aurelius Global, Incorporated. He went on for some time. The personal bequests, the River Oaks estate to Eleanor, various properties to various children, trust funds for grandchildren not yet born. Everyone's share of the estate was equal, 20% each to the 4 children, 20% to Eleanor in a managed trust. Everyone was nodding. Everyone was patient. Then Harold Fitch reached the final page. With regard to the executive succession of Aurelius Global and the appointment of the next chief executive officer and board chair. He paused. He looked up over his glasses at the table. Mr. Aurelius has appointed his daughter, Dominique Aurelius, as sole successor to the chief executive position, effective immediately pending board confirmation. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Dominique had ever heard. She felt it before she understood it, a warmth in her chest that she recognized distantly as the thing she had been working toward for 11 years without allowing herself to name it. She looked straight ahead at Harold Fitch. Beside her, Theo exhaled quietly. Julian made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Marcus said nothing. His jaw was a locked door. Eleanor looked at her daughter for the first time in the meeting. Something moved across her face, complicated, ancient, unresolved, and then she looked away. Marcus waited 48 hours. Then he called a meeting. He called it without Dominique. He called it in the private dining room of the River Oaks Country Club, at a round table that meant no one was sitting at the head, which was itself a kind of statement. Present, Marcus, Julian, 3 of the 6 independent board members of Aurelius Global, and Gerald Mabry, a corporate attorney who was not Harold Fitch, and who had a reputation for finding legal architecture inside situations that everyone else thought were settled. The will can be challenged, Gerald Mabry said, spreading his hands on the table like he was laying out a map. Cornelius showed signs of cognitive decline in the 18 months before his death. There are medical records. There are emails from his own assistant noting lapses. We can argue undue influence, that Dominique leveraged her position to manipulate. She wasn't even in Houston for the last 4 months before he died, Julian said. He was pouring wine. He was always pouring something. She was in Singapore negotiating the Vantage acquisition. She didn't need to be in the room, Marcus said, not looking at Julian. She could have influenced him remotely. Over years, she's been positioning herself for this for a decade. That's called working, Julian said pleasantly. Marcus looked at him then. Whose side are you on? Julian smiled in the way that meant nothing. I'm on the side of whatever makes the most sense. I haven't decided yet. The 3 board members shifted in their seats. They were powerful men, but they recognized the particular cruelty of sibling politics and wanted no permanent part in it. What they didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, was that Julian had gone to see Dominique the morning of this meeting. He had sat in her kitchen and drunk her coffee and told her, with complete and friendly calm, that Marcus was planning to challenge the will and that he would probably approach the board within the week. He had told her this not from loyalty, but from the calculation that Dominique's ascendancy was more likely than Marcus's reversal, and Julian had always bet on the horse most likely to win rather than the horse he most wanted to ride. Dominique had listened without expression. Then she had said, "What do you want for this?" Julian had smiled. "The Singapore deal goes through my division." "That's a $4 billion acquisition." "I know." She had studied him for a long moment. Then she said, "Done." What she didn't know was that Julian had also, 3 days earlier, met privately with 2 of the same board members Marcus was now courting, just to have options. Julian never had fewer than 3 positions in any situation. It was how he slept at night. Theo went to see his mother. The River Oaks estate in the weeks after Cornelius's death was a strange weather system. The house staff moved quietly. The good rooms were kept closed, and Eleanor occupied the sunroom and the garden and not much else, as though she were performing a very dignified retreat from the larger premises of her life. She had started having a glass of wine with lunch, which was new, and she had started calling Theo twice a day, which was not. "She favors you," Dominique had once said to Theo, when they were teenagers, not bitterly, just factually, the way you note that someone has brown eyes. It was true. Eleanor had always loved all of her children, but she had been closest to Theo, her youngest, her beautiful, complicated one who needed her in a way the others had stopped doing too early. There was a tenderness between them that the other siblings had quietly resented for years without discussing. What none of the siblings knew, not Dominique, not Marcus, not Julian, was what Theo had discovered when he was helping with renovations at the estate 2 years ago, because he hadn't just found the will. He had found letters. A bundle of letters, tied with a white ribbon in a locked box inside the locked drawer, written in a hand he didn't recognize, addressed to his mother. Letters that were not from his father. Letters that dated back 33 years, stopping abruptly, then resuming for a brief period 12 years ago and stopping again. Letters that were signed only with the initial R, and that contained sentences that rearranged everything Theo thought he understood about the architecture of his own family. He had read them twice, replaced them exactly, and never spoken of it. He carried what he knew the way you carry a stone in your shoe, always aware of it, always slightly altering his gait because of it. He had not yet decided what to do with it. He told himself he was protecting his mother. He may have been right. He may have been protecting himself from what knowing would require him to do. He brought Alina roses from the garden. She had always loved the ones by the east wall, and they sat together in the sunroom, and Alina said, eventually, without being prompted, "I need you to support your sister." Theo was quiet for a moment. "Marcus won't make it easy." "I know what Marcus is doing." Alina set down her wine. "He's been calling me, asking me to weigh in with the board, suggesting that your father wasn't thinking clearly at the end." Her voice was controlled in the way of people managing a great deal at once. "Your father was thinking perfectly clearly. He just wasn't thinking in the direction Marcus expected." "And you," Theo asked, "did you know what he was going to do with the succession?" Alina looked at him. "He discussed it with me, once, about a year ago." "What did you say?" "I said she was the right choice." Alina's expression shifted, became something that Theo couldn't fully read. "And I meant it, even if it's not what I would have chosen a different way." That last sentence landed oddly. Theo turned it over. He wanted to ask what she meant. He let it go. For now. Marcus's wife was named Renata. She was 41, French-American, a former art curator who now ran the Aurelius Foundation, and she was one of those people who seemed polished to the point of perfection in all social situations while containing, underneath, a very cold and precise rage. She knew about Cassidy. She had known for 14 months. She had chosen not to act because she was strategic, and strategy required patience, and patience meant waiting for the moment when acting would cost Marcus more than it cost her. Cornelius's death had not been that moment. The succession crisis was not that moment, but she was close. She could feel the geometry of it changing. Cassidy Reyes was 29, an architect at a firm that had done work for Aurelius Real Estate, which was how she and Marcus had met. She was not naive. She knew Marcus was married, knew his family, knew the weight of the name, but she had made the mistake that intelligent women sometimes make with powerful men, which was confusing their certainty for safety. Marcus was certain about everything. He was certain he wanted Cassidy. He was certain he was going to run Aurelius Global. He was certain his father had been wrong and his sister was a placeholder. He was certain he would eventually sort Renata out, though he hadn't decided precisely how. What he was not certain about, the thing he had been not thinking about for 6 months with enormous effort, was the night, 16 months ago, when Cassidy had told him she was pregnant, and 2 weeks later told him she wasn't anymore, and he had felt a relief so profound and so ugly that he had never forgiven himself for it and had never spoken of it again. He didn't know that she still thought about it every day. He didn't know that she had, in the weeks since Cornelius's death, begun talking to someone. She had been talking to Julian. Not romantically. Julian was too self-preserving for romantic entanglements with his brother's girlfriend, or so he told himself. But they had run into each other at an Aurelius Foundation event, and Julian had bought her a drink, and Cassidy was lonely and unhappy in the particular way of women who have given a great deal to a man who is always about to give them everything in return. And Julian was a brilliant listener who made people feel understood because he was actually paying attention, just not for the reasons they thought. Cassidy had told Julian about the pregnancy. Julian had said all the right things. He had also, 3 days later, told Marcus, over the phone, casually, in the middle of a conversation about the board challenge, that he knew. There was a silence. "She told you," Marcus said. "She didn't mean to," Julian's voice was entirely easy. "We were having a drink. She was upset, you know how it is." "What do you want, Julian?" "Nothing. I just thought you should know that people are talking to people." A pause. "Also, Renata had lunch with Harold Fitch last week. Did you know that?" Marcus said nothing. "Thought not," Julian said and hung up. Dominique's first week as acting CEO of Aurelius Global was the kind of week that showed you exactly who people were, because people under threat revert to their essential nature very quickly. She called a full executive team meeting on day 2. She sat at the head of the table that her father had sat at for 30 years, and she did not adjust her position or her tone or her level of eye contact to make anyone more comfortable, because she had spent 11 years watching men in that room be comfortable at her expense, and she was done with it. She presented her first 90 days plan, restructuring in the pharmaceutical division, moving forward on Singapore, a strategic review of the real estate portfolio, with the clarity of someone who had been rehearsing this not for weeks, but for years. 3 board members gave her the careful, provisional engagement of people waiting to see which way the wind blew. 2 were warm. 1, Gerald Donahue, 64, longtime ally of Marcus, sat with his arms folded and said almost nothing. She noted all of this and filed it. After the meeting, her second in command, a woman named Frances Ose, who had been her mentor at Aurelius Global for 7 years and was widely considered the sharpest operational mind in the building, leaned close and said quietly, "Gerald Donahue has been on 3 calls with your brother's attorney in the last week." "I know," Dominique said. "What do you want to do about it?" Dominique looked at Donahue's retreating back. "Not yet," she said. "Let him think it's working." What she didn't say, even to Frances, was what she had found in her father's personal files the morning after the will reading, when Preeta had handed her a sealed envelope with her name on it that Cornelius had left with his personal items. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting, 4 pages, dated 14 months ago, in which he had explained, not apologized, explained in the language of a man who had always preferred honesty to comfort, why he had taken so long to do what he was now doing, why the succession had not been announced while he was alive. He had been afraid, he wrote, not of what his sons would do, but of what Alina would feel. "Your mother loves you," he had written, "but she has always worried that you were more mine than hers. She is wrong, but the feeling is real to her, and I did not want to deepen it by making the succession public while I was alive to see her face." Dominique read that paragraph 4 times. Then she put the letter in her desk drawer and locked it. It began with an email. Anonymous, sent from a Proton mail addressed to 3 board members, to Julian's personal account, and to Marcus. Not to Dominique, not to Theo. The email was 2 sentences long. "Before you decide who should run Aurelius Global, you should know who the Aurelius children actually are. Ask Alina about Robert Whitmore." Robert Whitmore. Marcus forwarded it to Julian within minutes. Julian read it in a coffee shop and put his phone face down on the table and sat very still for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and called the only person he knew would tell him the truth. He called Theo. There was a pause when Julian read him the email, a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "Theo," Julian said, "you know who Robert Whitmore is." Theo said, "Julian, you've known for a while." "I found letters," Theo said. "I wasn't going to." "Theo," Julian's voice had lost its easy quality. Beneath the charm, there was something raw and very young. "Who is he?" A long silence. "He was Mom's someone she knew before Dad, and for a while during." Theo's voice was careful and exhausted. "The letters stopped about 32 years ago. Then there were a few again about 12 years ago." Julian did the math quickly and felt the floor shift under him. 32 years ago. "Yeah." A longer silence. "Which one of us?" "I don't know," Theo said, which was true. The letters were passionate and anguished and full of Alina's name, but they said nothing that was specific enough to answer the question that Julian was now asking. They were the letters of a man who had loved her and been sent away and come back and been sent away again. They didn't name children. They didn't need to. "Julian, I need you to not." "I need to know," Julian said. "We need to know." "No," Theo said, and there was a force in it that Julian didn't usually hear from him. "We need to think about this. Because if you go pulling on this thread right now, in the middle of everything else, it's not just us it destroys." Julian hung up. He sat in the coffee shop for another hour, nursing a coffee that went cold. He watched people walk past on the street outside, living their simple, uninherited lives, and he felt something that he would have been too proud to call grief and so-called pragmatism instead. Then he made a call, not to Marcus, not to Theo. He called Gerald Mabry. "I need to know," he said, "what a paternity question does to a will challenge." Alina received 3 phone calls before noon the next day. She did not answer any of them. She called Theo. "Someone sent an email," she said without preamble. When Theo said nothing, she said, "How long?" 2 years. She breathed out, "The letters." "Yes." A long pause. "Theo, I need you to understand something." Her voice was the steadiest thing he had heard in weeks. "Whatever you found in those letters, whatever you think you understand about what happened between me and Robert, your father knew. He knew when it was happening, and he knew when it stopped, and he knew when it happened again. He and I have lived with this our whole marriage, the whole real truth of it, not a version, the whole truth. And we chose each other." A pause. "We chose each other after." Theo said, "Was he?" "Your father is your father," Alina said, and there was something in her voice that closed the door firmly. "Cornelius Aurelius is the father of all 4 of his children. I am telling you this as your mother, and I am asking you to believe me." Theo believed her. Whether she was entirely right was something neither of them would know for certain for another 3 weeks. The board was scheduled to meet in 3 weeks for the official confirmation of Dominique's appointment. Marcus had spent those 3 weeks in high-velocity motion. Meetings, phone calls, lunches, the particular social machinery of men trying to move things that are supposed to be immovable. He had 5 of the 9 votes, he believed. Dominique had 3. One was undecided. Patricia Huang, a former federal judge who had joined the Aurelius board 4 years ago and who was, in Marcus's assessment, the most genuinely independent thinker on it, which made her either the key to everything or a complete wild card. He had requested a meeting with Patricia. She had agreed. They met for lunch at a neutral restaurant, her choice, and Marcus was at his considerable best. Warm, reasonable, grief-stricken just enough to be human, articulate about his vision for the company, careful never to seem like he was attacking his sister, but instead asking, thoughtfully, whether the succession had truly been the product of their father's clearest mind, whether Cornelius hadn't perhaps been influenced by his own guilt about not having recognized Dominique's talent sooner, whether. Patricia Huang put down her fork. "Marcus," she said, "I've been on your family's board for 4 years. I watched your father for 4 years. I want you to hear me clearly." She looked at him steadily. "Your father was one of the most precise thinkers I have ever been in a room with. He knew exactly what he was doing when he made that decision. The question I'm sitting with is not whether he was sound. The question I'm sitting with is whether you are." Marcus said nothing. "I'll let you know my vote before the meeting," she said, and returned to her lunch. 3 days before the board meeting, something happened that nobody had planned. A journalist published a story. Not a front-page story. It appeared in a business journal, a careful, heavily lawyered piece, but it described family divisions at Aurelius Global following the death of Patriarch Cornelius Aurelius, mentioned an ongoing challenge to the succession arrangements, and referenced questions surrounding the health of the late CEO in the final months of his life. The story was sourced only to people familiar with the family. Dominique read it at 6 a.m. in her office and felt something that was not quite anger. Anger was too hot for this, but more like the cold clarity that comes when you've been told exactly who someone is. She called Francis, find out who talked to that journalist. Francis called back in 4 hours. It came through Gerald Mabry's office. Mabry has a lunch relationship with the reporter going back 8 years. Dominique said, and Mabry works for Marcus. He does. Dominique was quiet. But that's not the most interesting part, Francis added. The journalist also had information about the paternity email. She didn't run that part, her editor killed it. It was too unverified, but she had it. And the only people who received that email were Marcus, Julian, and 3 board members. Dominique thought about this for a very long time. Then she called Theo. "Tell me what you know," she said. "All of it right now." Eleanor Aurelius had not survived 40 years as the wife of Cornelius Aurelius by being a passive participant. She had been, in her time, the most important relationship he had, and that had required, not subservience, nothing so simple, but a very sophisticated management of power, which meant knowing when to hold it in reserve, when to deploy it, and when to allow others to believe you had none. She called a dinner. She called it at the River Oaks estate, on a Wednesday, using the formal dining room that had not been opened since Cornelius's death, and she sent handwritten notes to all 4 of her children asking them to come. Not requesting. Asking in the way that made refusing feel like a deeper refusal than they were prepared to make. They all came, even Julian, who had been avoiding the estate. Eleanor sat at the head of the table that had been Cornelius's and didn't acknowledge the symbolism because she didn't need to. The table was set with the good china. The flowers were from the garden, and the room looked exactly the way it had for every significant family occasion for 30 years. Eleanor had dressed carefully, a deep navy dress, the pearl strand, Cornelius's watch on her wrist, which she had started wearing 2 days ago, and which nobody had commented on because none of them knew how to. They ate. Eleanor directed the conversation with the precision of a conductor, light topics, family memories, the comfortable language of the dinner table, and none of her children could find a way to redirect it without seeming like they were pulling a gun at dinner. Marcus tried once, obliquely, beginning a sentence about the board. Eleanor spoke over him gently and completely without appearing to. After dessert, she asked the staff to leave. She folded her hands on the table. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All of you together." She looked at each of them in turn. An email was sent to several people in this family and on this board, an email about Robert Whitmore. She said the name evenly, without flinching. "I know who sent it." The table was very still. "Your brother Julian," she said and looked at him, "did not send it. Your brother Theo did not send it." She looked at Marcus. "Marcus." Marcus's jaw was set. "Mom." "I'm not asking," she said. "I'm telling you what I know so that we don't have to pretend." Her voice did not waver. "Robert Whitmore was someone I knew, someone I loved briefly and badly and at a cost that I have been paying for 40 years. Your father knew. We worked through it together because that is what people who have built something do when it becomes difficult." She looked around the table again. "I will not allow that history to be weaponized against your sister. Not by the board, not by anyone else in this family, and not by you." The silence was extraordinary. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, and her voice dropped half a note, became something denser, "I own 20% of Aurelius Global through the trust your father established, and I have complete discretion over how that stake is voted on questions of board composition and executive appointments." She paused. "Patricia Huang called me this morning. We had a long conversation." Another pause. "I will be making my position on the succession known to the full board before Thursday's vote." She looked at Marcus one more time. "Your father chose your sister. I am choosing your sister. The only question that remains is whether you will spend the next several years burning down everything he built trying to overturn a decision that is not going to be overturned, or whether you will find a way to be part of what this family could still be." She picked up her wine glass. "I will leave you to think about it." She stood. She walked out of the dining room. Her heels made a sound on the marble that none of them forgot. Julian let out a long, slow breath. "She knew it was you," Dominique said to Marcus quietly. She was not angry. She sounded almost sorry. Marcus stared at the table. Something was happening behind his eyes that didn't have a name yet. "I was going to win," he said, mostly to himself. "I had the votes." "You had 4, Julian said. "Maybe. Patricia was always going to be Mom's." Marcus pushed back his chair. He stood. He looked at his sister. "You want to know the real thing, the real actual thing that I can't." He stopped, collected himself, started again. "He never told me. He let me run real estate for 15 years. He gave me every indication that I was, and then he just." He made a gesture that somehow contained everything. Not even a conversation, not even a warning. Dominique looked at him. "I know," she said. "Don't. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying I know because he did the same thing to me for the first 8 years I worked here. He made me prove it twice for everything you were handed once." She held his gaze. "I'm not telling you to feel guilty. I'm telling you so you understand that I know what it is to want it and not have it be given. And I still know this company better than anyone in this building." A long silence. Marcus looked at her for a moment, and in that moment, just barely, something human moved in his face. Then he looked away. He walked out. Theo said nothing. Julian said nothing. Dominique sat for another minute at the table, in the house she'd grown up in, with the good china and the garden flowers and the weight of all of it, and she thought about her father pressing his hand to his chest in the rain. The board confirmed Dominique Aurelius as CEO and chair of Aurelius Global on a Thursday morning, with 7 votes in favor, 1 abstention, Gerald Donahue, who was too cautious to be permanently wrong, and 1 vote against. Marcus did not attend the meeting. His proxy was submitted by his attorney. Patricia Huang voted yes. Elinor's formal letter to the board, submitted the previous evening, recommended confirmation in terms that were specific, measured, and as one board member later described it to a colleague over drinks. "The most effective 9 paragraphs of advocacy I have read in 30 years on corporate boards." Dominique shook hands with everyone present, sat in the chair at the head of the conference table for a moment after the others left, and felt the full weight of $31 billion and the rest of her life settle across her shoulders. Francis Osei knocked on the open door. "Ready." "In a minute," Dominique said. She took out her father's letter from her bag. She read the last paragraph again. "You are not the compromise I made with my own fear. You are the thing I was always working toward and was too proud to say out loud. The company is yours. More importantly, the belief that it can be something better than what I made it, that is yours too. I trust you with both." She put the letter away. She stood up. "Ready," she said. Marcus took a leave of absence from Aurelius Global for 3 months, which everyone understood was a resignation by stages. He and Renata sold the River Oaks house and bought a smaller place in Aspen. Renata had, in the weeks after the board vote, finally done what she had been strategically deferring for 14 months. She had called a lawyer. The divorce was quiet and expensive, and Marcus had no leverage, which was a new experience for him. He found, in the mountains, in the slow, difficult process of having nothing to manage and nowhere to perform, that he was able, occasionally, to breathe. He called Dominique on the 6-month anniversary of their father's death. He didn't say much. She didn't either. But they stayed on the phone for 20 minutes, which was longer than they had spoken without fighting in 7 years. Cassidy moved to New York and joined a different architecture firm. She blocked Marcus's number and then, 3 months later, unblocked it, and then never used it. She started therapy. It helped more than she expected. Julian ran the Singapore acquisition, which closed at $4.2 billion and was widely described in the financial press as a masterpiece of deal-making. He was photographed at the closing dinner with a glass of champagne, looking exactly like himself, and Dominique, standing beside him, looked like she was considering whether to trust him. She had not decided yet. He knew she hadn't. He found it oddly motivating. Theo asked for a DNA test. Not to challenge the will was confirmed, the succession was settled, that door was closed, but for himself, because he needed to know. The test came back on a quiet morning in his apartment. He sat with it for a long time. Then he called his mother. "I'm still me," he said. "Whatever this says or doesn't say, I just needed to know." Elinor was quiet for a moment, and, she said very softly, "He was my father," Theo said. "Cornelius was my father, the test confirms it." "I told you," Elinor said. "I know you did." "Then why?" "Because I needed to know for me," he said. "Not because I doubted you, because the not knowing was inside me and I had to let it out." A pause. "I don't know who sent Julian and Marcus the email. I need to tell you that. I found the letters, but I never." "I know you didn't," she said immediately. I've always known you didn't. Theo exhaled. Mom, who did send it? A very long pause. Gerald Donahue had an investigator looking into the family for 3 months before your father died. He was building leverage. He's been trying to get control of the pharmaceutical board for years. Another pause. He miscalculated how much the family would close ranks. And Marcus using it. Marcus received information and made a choice about what to do with it, Eleanor said, in the precise tone of a woman who has decided to love her son without absolving him. That's on him, not on the person who gave it to him. Theo thought about this. How do you know it was Donahue? Eleanor said mildly, I have always known things in this family that people assumed I didn't. It was the only power available to me for a very long time. A pause. Dominique is changing that. Dominique was in her office on the 62nd floor of Aurelius Tower when the rain came again, 9 months after her father's death. That same personal, opinionated rain, hammering the same floor-to-ceiling windows. She stood at the glass and looked at the same city beneath her, drowning and glittering at once, and she thought about what it meant to inherit something and what it meant to earn it and how rarely those were the same thing. Preeta knocked. You have the Singapore integration call in 10 minutes. I know, Dominique said without turning. Come in for a second. Preeta came in. You called me first, Dominique said. The night he died, you called me first. Preeta said nothing. He asked you to. He didn't need to ask, Preeta said. Dominique nodded slowly. She turned from the window. She straightened her jacket. She looked exactly like herself. All right, she said. Let's go to work. The House of Aurelius will continue. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more amazing stories like this one. Tell us where you are watching from. Like, share, and drop your thoughts below. See you in the next one.